Costello and Brown are back with me. So, Bob, I want to take a look at the deficit because that is a key piece of all this. When he came into office, it was $438 billion. And I think we have a graphic that shows how it went up to $793 billion, according to the Federal Reserve. They're saying could be $1 trillion next year. So what's the legacy of Paul Ryan?
The cloud over Speaker Ryan's legacy is that it goes before even he became Speaker in 2015. He mounted an ideological project to try to contain the federal deficit going back to 2008 when he came out with his roadmap for budget reform. And he promised Republicans if they took power, he would do his best to get those reforms through. He was on the GOP ticket in 2012. But he was never able to convince a lot of his party, let alone Democrats, to go along with his plans. So he remains a politician who's well-liked in the Republican Party, but whose ambitions were never fulfilled.
Yeah, and he clearly wants to sort of help start shaping what his legacy will be, right? There's these glossy videos that you can look at, and people like the former Speaker, John Boehner, who are saying nice things about him. What are we going to hear from him? Because aren't we going to hear from him later today, his kind of formal farewell address?
It's formally a farewell, but you really have Speaker Ryan signaling to the whole party that he wants to stay around. He's only in his late 40s. This is someone who's not going to likely exit the national political stage. He has these videos. He's touting his own record, not really talking about his complicated relationship politically with President Trump or the deficits, but trying to say he did his best. Speaker Ryan's, he's a glimpse into how so many Republicans frame themselves these days. They're doing their best. Turbulent times, but that doesn't mean everyone shares their view, and there's a real debate over whether Speaker Ryan handled this moment in the proper way, whether you're a Republican or Democrat. Some say he did, some say he didn't.
Yeah, I'm curious what you think, Congressman Costello. You've considered yourself a fiscal conservative, and you're leaving along with Paul Ryan at the end of this. I wonder what you think, how he leaves the Republican Party, and does the Republican Party that you're part of, the fiscal conservatism part of it, exist anymore?
It does. I think the Speaker has served honorably and admirably, and he laid out a vision in so many different iterations, and he tried to fulfill that vision. And
so why couldn't he get it done?
Well, he needs enough votes in the House for every single very challenging, frankly, very difficult policy prerogative that he laid out. I mean, cutting spending is not easy. He will be the first person to tell you that. Reforming entitlement programs is not easy. But he laid out in detail the types of policies he felt that we needed to undertake. You also, frankly, have President Trump saying that he's not looking to rein in certain spending. We've increased defense spending. Yeah. And while there is what I think is a short-term increase in the deficit as a consequence of the tax bill, I think over the 10-year period, you will see more revenue growth as a consequence of tax reform. And let's not forget, as a developed country, our tax rating was much, much lower than the rest of the industrialized world, and we simplified our tax code and we brought down corporate tax rates, which makes us more competitive globally going into the next decade. I think that was very, very significant. I think that we have not celebrated or appreciated how positive that impact is going to be.
Congressman Brown, do you think it's going to have that impact, and what do you see as Paul Ryan's legacy?
No, I'm going to give Paul low marks on this report card. Look, being Speaker is tough, and I certainly appreciate Paul's willingness to assume that role and take on that responsibility. But when he did, he said that he would be a courageous conservative, and he's been neither. He didn't have the courage to bring immigration to the floor when there was bipartisan support to address the Dreamers, the DACA recipients. He didn't have the courage to bring gun legislation to the floor where there was bipartisan support for some elements of gun prevention legislation. And he certainly wasn't conservative, because what was already a large annual deficit is now significantly larger as it approaches nearly $1 trillion, just piling on to the debt. So I'm going to give Paul, who I like, he's a nice guy. No one will probably say anything other than that. But I'm going to give him poor marks as Speaker. It's a tough job. He took the the role nevertheless, and he didn't deliver.
Yeah, tough timing for him. I will let you have the last word, Robert Costa. So, short term, what are we going to see from Paul Ryan? I know he says he's going to take his wife on a nice vacation, maybe ambassador to Ireland. What do you see for Paul Ryan?
Personally, for Ryan, he can do many things, work in the private sector, but that's not really what's important. What's important is, do Paul Ryan-type Republicans have a place in President Trump's Republican Party in the next 2 years, in the next 10 years? Does that traditional conservative survive? Is Paul Ryan someone who has a future in the GOP, or is he a relic of Reaganism? That's something Republican voters have to decide, and for now, they seem to be leaning toward President Trump.
Robert Costa, always great to see you. Congressman Ryan Costello, Congressman Anthony Brown.